Hi everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming to help celebrate my dad. For those who don't know me, my name is Julia. I'm Mick's oldest daughter, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Melanie, Mick's youngest daughter. I'm taping these remarks ahead of time because while I like to think I've inherited my dad's way with words, unfortunately I have not inherited his facility with public speaking, which I hate. So doing this to make sure I can stay calm there in the room with you. So everyone in the room today knows how awesome my dad was, but I had the incredible privilege of growing up with him for a father. So this is a list of the specific ways he was awesome from my vantage point. Growing up, my dad could identify any city in North America depicted in a movie or TV show that we were watching based on the buildings alone. When I was a kid, I thought this was a remarkable talent. Once he described a river in a movie Mel and I were watching to us as deep and navigable. When I stayed home from school sick, my dad would either set me up in my bed surrounded by Nancy Drew books and Archie comics, or in front of the TV watching The Price is Right with medicine and popsicles, and head to his office and he would say, "Holler if you need me." And when I was starting to feel better, he'd say he was glad to see me on the mend. And these are things that I'll be saying to my own kids when they're sick. When my dad got a new piece of clothing, he would stand arms out and twirl around and say, "Have you seen my new cows? They've been gone for 3 days, yesterday, today, and tomorrow." I was given to understand this was an old Nebraska saying, but a quick Google search yielded no results, so your guess is as good as mine. When I was a kid and we lived on Onwatton Lake, my dad would stop the car around Gravel Drive and let me sit in his lap and drive, really just steer, all the way home. And when I was a young tween and teen, he would switch places with me in the car and actually let me drive. So by the time I turned 16, I had a lot of practice driving under my belt. And this made me feel very capable and like he trusted me. When we were little, at least once, my dad made Mel and I bundle up and go lie on the lake in the winter at night to witness some meteorological phenomenon or other. And he would lie there and say, "Look, girls, look at the stars." He taught me how to recognize Orion at an early age, and I always think of him when I see it. On particularly nice late spring or early summer days, my dad would keep us home from school claiming it was too nice to be inside. I actually always really liked school, so I don't think this was the treat for me that he thought it was, but I think he was probably imagining how much he wished someone would have done that for him when he was a boy. Even though I was happy to go to school, I like to stay home too, and it made me feel special and like my dad was an eccentric and that he was unique among my friends' parents. My dad came to every single one of my volleyball games in the 8th grade, the only time I ever played any kind of sports. And he loved them so much he wrote an article about the team, and he would always end up driving a carload of my teammates home. He was known as the dad who was always at the games. When we went on a trip, after we'd check into the hotel, he'd get antsy and say, "Come on, girls, let's see what kind of trouble we can get into." And I think about this all the time when I take my boys shopping. Speaking of trips, once when we were staying at the Royal York in Toronto before Mel or I ever lived there, we locked ourselves out of our room immediately after checking in. We were in the hallway wondering what to do when my dad noticed a phone, and he said, "All these big hotels have in-house detectives. We'll just call down and get them to come let us in." So he called the front desk and asked for the detective, and Mel and I were like, "What? I don't think they have a detective." After he got off the phone, a hotel employee happened to walk by, and she was able to let us in the room. So once the door was open, my dad picked up the phone again, called the front desk, and said, "Hello, this is Mick Lowe again, 86 the House Dick," and then hung up the phone. When I was an undergrad, my dad once gave me a journal for Christmas with the inscription, "Jewel, screw the grades, fill this." My sister hates talking about this, but she's a really good singer and musician, and once she shared a file with me that she'd made where she'd sung and played guitar, and she had made percussion by tapping a Jewel CD case against her desk. I put it on my iPod, and when we went to my dad's house that Christmas, I gave him my headphones and asked him to listen to it. I wanted him to try and guess who was singing the song, which he had never heard before. He listened and took the headphones off, and he guessed Serena Ryder. And when I told him it was his second-born daughter, I'll never forget the look on his face as he said, "You're kidding," and put the headphones back on so he could listen to it again, because he was so in awe and proud of her talent. My dad advocated for recycling, work-life balance, working from home, and bringing reusable bags to the grocery store before any of that was cool. After he had the stroke, my dad lived in the rehab hospital for 4 months, and when he got out, he lived back home at the lake for a year, but he needed constant care. You know that after the stroke, my dad was still mentally very sharp, but he did lose some important parts of cognition, and that included decision-making abilities, and also he was very physically impaired. Anita, the earth angel, decided to dedicate herself to trying to keep him at home at his beloved lake, but doing that was humanly impossible. Before he moved into the manor, Mel and I would occasionally go to the lake and spend the weekend with him so that Anita could get some much-needed time in town. At the time, I was in my mid-20s, and unless I had stayed up all night, I had not seen any time on the clock previous to 9 a.m. in years. And as you may or may not know, my dad was a morning person, like really early morning. Like to me, I consider it the nighttime, and he considers it the morning. So when Mel and I were there, he'd try to sleep in as late as possible, but he needed our help to get out of bed and get dressed and get his meds, etc. So he'd call for whichever one of us had agreed to do the morning shift the night before. And we'd stumble in bleary-eyed and help get him up and get him dressed. And after everything was done, we'd set him up on the couch in the living room with his laptop. And when it was my turn, I'd curl up in the armchair and try to go back to sleep for as long as possible. And one time I was awakened when my dad stood over me and covered me with a blanket. Even though he could barely walk, even though he could only use one arm, and even though I was a fully grown adult. And now that I have my own kids, thinking back to that moment hits different, as the kids say. My dad called my oldest son, Jonas, the winsome grinner. That was his nickname for him. My dad died on a Saturday morning, and I was lucky enough to get to speak with him on the phone while he was still lucid on Thursday afternoon. I told him a story, and this story is embarrassing, but I'm going to tell it here for the purposes of remembering my dad. When my dad died, I was 30 weeks pregnant with my second son, Jack. And I spent the Thursday morning walking around the village of Pittsford where I live with my older son, Jonas. And at the time, Jonas was almost 3, and he was really, really into bridges. So when he made it clear that he wanted to run back and forth across the busy 2-lane bridge that goes over the Erie Canal in our little village, I was in no position to argue. It was hot, I was tired, I was very pregnant, and I was happy to just go back and forth across. There was a sidewalk on the bridge. So we crossed back and forth over and over until a police car pulled up, and a lovely officer stuck her head out of the window and told me she received a report that someone was letting their kids play in traffic. To this day, I feel confident that Jonas was in no danger. I had the situation well in hand. We were on a sidewalk. When I told my sister that story, she shrugged and said, "Americans." But when I told my dad that story, he said, "Wow, Jewel, I'm really proud of you." And I said, "What? Why?" And he said, "Being on the radar of local law enforcement already. Good job." And of course he meant, "You've only lived there a few years and already the police know who you are." And I kind of rolled my eyes and said, "Oh my God." And he said, "Well, you had to know that's what I was going to say." And I said, "That's not what I was thinking as the cop car pulled up. No." I ended the conversation saying I'd see him soon after Jack was born, and I brought Jack to visit. I would, of course, have spoken to him again before then. I would have spoken to him again that weekend normally, but his sense of time was pretty impaired at the end, so I usually just always told him we were coming soon. And he said he was really looking forward to it. After my dad died, one of my sister's oldest friends, Britt, wrote this about him on Facebook, which I really loved and wanted to share. She said, "Mick was a trusted friend and guardian to all of the Gen Yers that crossed his path. He was interested in our lives, opinions, and experiences. He listened without judgment. He gave all of our crap pop culture a solid go. In exchange, he asked us to get interested in the world around us. He showed us how to care for our community, society, and vulnerable populations. He used his experiences and his infectious passion for social justice to help us learn how to create an impact." I hate that my dad's not here. I hate that he never got to meet Jack and the boys won't have a relationship with him as they grow. And I hate that I don't get to have my weekly Sunday morning Skype sessions with him anymore. But I know that my dad would tell me that the best way to honor him is to live a happy, healthy life and to enjoy my boys as they grow and to help make my community a better place when I can. So that's what I plan to do. So I know that today is kind of a hard day, but I also know that I will be seeing so many faces that I haven't seen in a long time, and I really look forward to catching up with everybody. So thanks again for coming.